June 20th, 1997, Dublin, Ireland. The RDS Arena holds 40,000 people, and tonight every single one of them is here to see Radiohead. 4 days ago, the band released OK Computer, an album already being hailed as a masterpiece. Next week, they'll headline Glastonbury Festival. They're at the absolute peak of their powers. Backstage, 28-year-old Thom Yorke is having a panic attack. He would later describe the moment to Uncut magazine. "I had this thing for a while where I was falling through trapdoors all the time into Oblivion, like acid flashbacks. It was happening towards the end of OK Computer. I was a complete fucking mess when that cycle had finished. On stage, the band's equipment malfunctions twice. The sound cuts out completely mid-song. Yorke, already on edge, can barely finish the set. After the show, he sits in the dressing room unable to speak. Band members ask if he's all right. He can hear them, but the words won't come." Guitarist Ed O'Brien remembers, "Personally speaking, and to my own suffering, I spent a lot of time looking out for Thom. It was all about making sure he was able to get through the gig. I had to be there for him like a brother." Over the next 18 months, Radiohead will tour the world promoting OK Computer. They'll win Grammys. They'll be called the saviors of rock and roll, and their lead singer will slowly lose his mind. 3 years later, in October 2000, Radiohead will release their follow-up album with no singles, no music videos, and almost no promotion. It will debut at #1 in America, their first chart-topping album. Critics will call it pretentious, derivative, unlistenable. A decade later, Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, and The Times will all name it the greatest album of the 2000s. This is the story of Kid A, the album Radiohead made while trying to disappear. The album that saved them by nearly destroying them. The album that changed music forever by sounding like nothing else on earth. Welcome to the Sound Vault. Every album has a story. This is Radiohead's. To understand Kid A, you have to understand what OK Computer did to Radiohead. Released in June 1997, OK Computer was instantly canonical. The NME called it one of the greatest albums of living memory. The Guardian declared it destined to be recognized as one of the definitive records of all time. A reader poll in Q magazine, just 6 months after release, voted it the second greatest album ever made. The album sold 7.8 million copies worldwide. It peaked at number 21 on the Billboard 200, Radiohead's highest US chart position to date. At the 1998 Grammy Awards, it won Best Alternative Music Album and was nominated for Album of the Year. Radiohead became ubiquitous. They were on magazine covers. They were on MTV. Calvin Klein wanted to meet them. Michael Stipe from REM became Yorke's friend and mentor, trying to prepare him for what was coming. But nothing prepared Yorke for the year-long Against Demons world tour. The pressure was relentless. Every night, another arena. Every day, another interview asking the same questions about alienation, technology, and what it means to be important and significant. Every moment, the weight of expectation pressing down. Yorke told Rolling Stone years later, "I was getting into the sense of information overload. Which is ironic, really, since it's so much worse now." The lyrics of OK Computer had tapped into millennial anxiety. Paranoid androids, crashes on highways, pigs in cages on antibiotics. Critics saw Yorke as a prophet of digital disconnection. Fans projected their fears onto him. And Yorke, shy and introverted by nature, couldn't handle being anyone's savior. The breaking point came in November 1997 at Birmingham's NEC Arena. Yorke remembers, "I walked out of soundcheck, disappeared, lost the security, and then was trying to get out of the building. I was trying to escape." He ended up on a train full of Radiohead fans heading to that night's show. "There was nowhere to go, so I hid on the train," Yorke told Rolling Stone. "And that was the nearest I came to trying to escape." Throughout the show, he repeated a mantra given to him by Michael Stipe. "I'm not here. This isn't happening." That phrase would become a song on the next album, How to Disappear Completely. Yorke later told NME, "I came off at the end of that show, sat in the dressing room and couldn't speak. People were saying, 'You all right?' I knew people were speaking to me, but I couldn't hear them. I'd just so had enough. And I was bored with saying I'd had enough." The tour finally ended in April 1998. By then, Yorke was, in his own words, completely unhinged. He told The Observer, "I always used to use music as a way of moving on and dealing with things. And I sort of felt like the thing that helped me deal with things had been sold to the highest bidder, and I was simply doing its bidding. And I couldn't handle that." Something else bothered him. Other bands copying Radiohead's sound. Dozens of acts were suddenly making densely layered, angsty alt-rock with strings and electronics. Yorke called it fridge buzz, constant background noise. The music that had felt personal and cathartic now felt like product. He became hostile to the music media. He stopped reading reviews. He felt trapped by success. Bassist Colin Greenwood explained to Record Collector, "The thing is, you're always developing and expanding. It's a protean thing. But what people seemed to want was for us to make OK Computer 2. Yorke bought a house in Cornwall and spent months walking along the cliffs, deliberately not making music. When he tried to write songs, nothing came. He described it to Christie's auction house in 2021. It was the end of OK Computer. We finished touring and I was sort of trapped in my own particular labyrinth, followed by this weird sort of monologue, a criticism of everything I did. It came from being sort of propelled into this weird state where people were projecting things onto me in a particular way. The projections had shut him down. Whenever I tried to write something, whenever I sat down in front of any instrument, I sort of froze," Yorke said. "I had this thing in the way, this little voice." By the end of 1998, Yorke had severe writer's block. When he picked up a guitar, he felt what he called the horrors. The band members went their separate ways for a while. They needed space, they needed time. But EMI Records expected a follow-up to OK Computer, and Radiohead had to decide, make OK Computer 2 and watch Yorke collapse completely, or do something radical. They chose radical. January 1999, Radiohead reconvene at Guillaume Tell Studios in Paris. They've been apart for months. Yorke arrives with fragments, not songs, just pieces, drum machine patterns, lyric scraps written on paper and pulled from a hat. Nothing resembling the complete compositions he usually brought to the band. Producer Nigel Godrich, who had helmed OK Computer, is back. But this time, there's no deadline from EMI, no commercial pressure, just 5 men trying to figure out what Radiohead sounds like when Thom Yorke can't write Radiohead songs. Yorke explains to Billboard what changed during his time away. "I wasn't getting off on anything that we'd normally do, so it was just, we have to do something else." That something else was electronic music. During his breakdown, Yorke had stopped listening to rock entirely. Instead, he immersed himself in artists from Warp Records, Aphex Twin, Autechre, Boards of Canada. He told the NME, "It was refreshing because the music was all structures and had no human voices in it." No human voices, no guitars, no expectations. He also drew inspiration from Talkie, Inghead's Remain in Light, Björk's Homogenic, Charles Mingus's Jazz Chaos, and the German krautrock band Can. Yorke wanted to make music where his voice was just another texture, not the focus. He wanted to strip away the rock mythology he'd grown to hate. Guitarist Johnny Greenwood, the only band member with formal music training, was intrigued. He'd been learning the ondes martenot, an obscure French electronic instrument from the 1920s used by composer Olivier Messiaen. But for guitarist Ed O'Brien and drummer Phil Selway, this new direction was terrifying. O'Brien told Music Radar, "If you're going to make a different sounding record, you have to change the methodology. And it's scary. Everyone feels insecure. I'm a guitarist, and suddenly it's like, well, there are no guitars on this track, or no drums." Selway struggled to find his place. In interviews, he admitted the sessions were disorienting, sitting behind the drum kit with nothing to play while the band built tracks from synthesizers and samples. The Paris sessions yielded almost nothing. After a month, they moved to Medley Studios in Copenhagen. Again, frustration. Ed O'Brien started keeping an online diary of their progress, posting updates to Radiohead's website. The early entries are revealing. Tom arrives and plays a new song on the acoustic. This was one of the last times. "It was sounding great last week, so what happened today? We're throwing shit at songs." One entry ominously notes they're worried about entering Stone Roses territory, a reference to the British band that took 5 years between albums and essentially self-destructed in the process. In April 1999, they moved again, this time to a mansion in Batsford Park, Gloucestershire. The lack of deadline that had seemed like freedom now felt like a curse. With no structure, they held tense band meetings. According to Wikipedia's Kid A article, they agreed. If they couldn't create an album they all believed in, they would disband Radiohead. By July, they'd moved to their own newly built studio in Oxfordshire, a converted barn they called Canned Applause. At least now they had a permanent base. But they still had no finished songs. September 1999. 9 months into recording, Radiohead are stuck. They have roughly 50 reels of tape, each containing 15 minutes of material. Almost none of it is finished. Ideas are started, abandoned, revisited, scrapped again. The turning point comes with one song, Everything in Its Right Place. Right. Yorke had written it on piano during his time in Cornwall. He describes the process to exclaim, I remember sitting endlessly playing the riff for everything in its right place. Sort of trying to meditate my way out of it and not being able to. The band tried recording it as a traditional rock arrangement in Copenhagen and Paris. Nothing worked. The song felt wrong with drums and guitars. In Gloucestershire, Yorke and Godrich tried something different. They transferred the song from piano to a Prophet 5 synthesizer, a vintage analog synth from the late 1970s. Godrich processed Yorke's vocals using Pro Tools, employing a scrubbing tool that created stuttering, robotic textures. The result was alien, unsettling. Nothing like Radiohead had ever sounded. Jonny Greenwood told the press, "We knew it had to be the first song, and everything just followed after it." He explained further. It was the first time Radiohead had been happy to leave a song sparse, instead of layering on top of what's a very good song or a very good sound and hiding it, camouflaging it in case it's not good enough. The sparse approach was revolutionary for Radiohead. No wall of guitars, no crescendos, just space, texture, and Yorke's processed voice singing, "Yesterday I woke up sucking a lemon." That line, about the sour expression Yorke wore for 3 years during the OK Computer era, was almost cut. He thought it was too silly. Godrich convinced him to keep it. Ed O'Brien and Phil Selway had to accept a difficult truth. Not every song needed every band member. Some tracks would have no guitar, some would have no drums. They had to learn, as Yorke put it, how to be a participant in a song without playing a note. In January 2000, Godrich made a bold suggestion. The band would split into 2 groups. One group would generate sounds or sequences without acoustic instruments, no guitars, no drums. The other group would develop those sounds into songs. This forced them to completely rethink arrangement. No more jamming in a room together. No more rock band methodology. By this point, they had completed 6 songs, including the title track Kid A. The title track featured Yorke's vocals processed through a ring modulator and a vocoder, making his voice sound inhuman, robotic, distant, disconnected. The lyrics came from his technique of cutting up phrases and pulling them randomly from a hat. The national anthem had an unusual history. Yorke had written the bass line when the band was still in school in the 1980s. They'd attempted it as a B-side during OK Computer, but abandoned it. For Kid A, they built it into something chaotic. Jonny Greenwood added ondes martenot. Yorke played bass instead of guitar. His vocals were ring-modulated into Oblivion. In November 1999, they recorded a brass section, conducting jazz musicians to play like a traffic jam, inspired by Charles Mingus's The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady and its organized chaos. The result was cacophonous, horns blaring over each other, fighting for space, creating beautiful disorder. How to Disappear Completely became the album's emotional anchor. The title and refrain, "I'm not here, this isn't happening," came directly from Yorke's mantra during the 1997 breakdown. Jonny Greenwood composed string arrangements recorded with the Orchestra of St. John's at Dorchester Abbey, a 12th century church near Oxford. They chose this orchestra specifically because they had performed pieces by Polish composer Krzysztof Penderecki, whose unsettling string work influenced the song. Idiotech emerged from experimentation with modular synthesizers. Jonny Greenwood created a 50-minute electronic piece, then gave it to Yorke. Yorke recalled, "I sat there and listened to this 50 minutes. I sat there with it, and I was like, there's something in here." He found one 2-minute section and built the song around it, adding apocalyptic lyrics about ice ages and taking children away, set to a driving electronic beat. Motion Picture Soundtrack, a song that had existed since the OK Computer era, was finally completed. Yorke played it on a harmonium, a small pump organ, giving it a hymn-like quality. By April 2000, over 18 months after they started, the recording was complete. They had finished 20 songs. Now came the hardest part, deciding which songs to release. Spring 2000, Radiohead have 20 finished songs and a problem. Every band member has different opinions about which songs should be on the album. Some want Kid A to be more electronic. Others want to include the guitar-based tracks. Nobody can agree. Ed O'Brien told the Chicago Tribune, "We operate like the UN, but I'm America." Yorke, as the primary songwriter, has the loudest voice, but this time, democracy nearly tears them apart. They decide on 10 tracks for Kid A, all of them leaning heavily toward electronics, ambience, and experimentation. The remaining 10 songs will become Amnesiac, released the following year. The decision to split the material into 2 albums rather than release a double album is pragmatic. Colin Greenwood explains, "We felt it was too dense for a double album. People needed time to absorb Kid A before we gave them more." But even after selecting the tracks, sequencing takes weeks. Every placement matters. Every transition creates meaning. They decide everything in its right place must open the album. It sets the tone. This is not OK Computer 2. The title track Kid A comes second. Yorke's voice buried under processing, barely recognizable. The national anthem provides chaos in track 3, the sound of anxiety manifested as brass cacophony. How to Disappear Completely offers a moment of relative peace before Tree Fingers, a 2-minute ambient interlude with no vocals. The second half balances the experimental first half. Optimistic features actual guitars and drums, perhaps the most traditional Radiohead song on the album. In Limbo uses warped guitars and processed vocals. Idiotheque is the dance floor panic attack. Morning Bell deconstructs what a rock song could be. Motion Picture Soundtrack closes the album with its harmonium and choir, fading out on the repeated phrase, "I will see you in the next life." The sequencing creates a journey from disconnection to obliteration to fragile hope. But now they have to figure out how to present this to the world. Summer 2000. Rob Gordon, Vice President of Marketing at Capitol Records, EMI's American subsidiary, has a problem. Radiohead's 4th album is finished. It's the most anticipated rock record since Nirvana's In Utero, and the band refuses to promote it in any traditional way. No singles, no music videos, no press tour, almost no interviews. Gordon tells Billboard, "It would be a business challenge." Some Capitol executives privately call the band's approach commercial suicide. Yorke explains his reasoning to Radiohead's website. "Coming back into the lion's den was not easy, especially for me personally. The stress of getting into that area at the time was too much." He later admits to regretting the no singles decision, telling press, "It meant the only judgment of our music was being made too much by critics' opinions, which was okay and everything, but there is nothing like the excitement of hearing your music on the radio." But in the moment, Yorke is adamant. He won't subject himself to the promotional grind that broke him last time. Radiohead does make one concession. They'll present the album to EMI executives, but not by giving them copies to take home. Instead, according to Wikipedia's Kid A article, they make the executives listen to the entire album on a bus ride from Hollywood to Malibu. The message is clear. This is a cohesive work. It must be experienced as a whole, in order, without interruption. Capitol's new media director Robin Sloan Bechtel sees an opportunity. If Radiohead won't do traditional promotion, maybe the internet can do something unprecedented. In 2000, streaming music online is still primitive. Most people have dial-up connections. YouTube won't exist for another 5 years. But Napster, the peer-to-peer file-sharing service, has shown that people want music digitally. Bechtel pitches a radical idea. Stream the entire album online 3 weeks before its official release. Capitol creates something called the iBlip, a Java applet that can be embedded on any website. It includes the full album stream, artwork, photos, and links to pre-order on Amazon. They distribute iBlips to anyone who wants one. Fan sites, music blogs, even small personal websites. It's an anti-exclusive. A major music magazine has no more privilege than an obscure blogger. Alongside the album stream, Radiohead and longtime visual collaborator Stanley Donwood create blips, dozens of cryptic 10 to 20-second animated videos featuring distorted imagery, pointy-toothed bears, and abstract nightmares. 5 blips are given as exclusives to MTV. The rest are released online for anyone to share. The blips are designed to be mysterious, unsettling, impossible to understand, just like the album. Thom Yorke explains the anti-video approach to Martin Clark's book, Radiohead Hysterical and Useless. "The thing that really did my head in was going home and turning on the TV and the ads for fucking banks and cars being more like MTV videos than MTV videos." But he acknowledges they're still selling a product. You're lying if you're pretending it's not a product, that you're not trying to sell something. The iBlip is streamed 400,000 times before the album's release, an unheard-of number in 2000. Then, inevitably, Kid A leaks on Napster. Bootlegs from Radiohead's Summer 2000 Mediterranean tour, where they premiered the new songs, are already circulating. Colin Greenwood tells the press, "We played in Barcelona, and the next day the entire performance was up on Napster. 3 weeks later, when we got to play in Israel, the audience knew the words to all the new songs, and it was wonderful." Yorke embraces it. Napster encourages enthusiasm for music in a way that the music industry has long forgotten to do. Some industry analysts predict the leaks will hurt sales. They're wrong. On September 5, 2000, Kid A is played publicly for the first time at the IMAX Theater in Lincoln Square, Manhattan. Listening parties happen in major cities. Capitol plays the album under controlled conditions for critics and fans. The hype is enormous. Spin calls it the most highly anticipated rock record since Nirvana's In Utero. October 2, 2000. Kid A is released in the UK. October 3rd, 2000. It's released in the US. First day UK sales, 55,000 copies. The biggest first day sales of the year, more than every other album in the top 10 combined. First week US sales, 207,000 copies. Kid A debuts at number 1 on the Billboard 200. It's Radiohead's first US number 1 album. It's the first British act to top the American charts since the Spice Girls in 1996. Without a single radio single, without a traditional music video, without MTV or mainstream press support. Rob Gordon, the Capitol executive who called it a business challenge, tells Billboard, "Everything in the industry at that point was like, the internet isn't important, it's not selling records. Everything for them had to translate to a sale." After Kid A was a success, nobody in the industry could believe it because there was no radio and there was no traditional music video. I knew at that point, this is the story of the internet. The internet has done this. Radiohead had invented digital music marketing a full 7 years before they'd release In Rainbows on a pay-what-you-want model, but commercial success was only half the battle. Critics had to reckon with what Radiohead had actually made. The critical response to Kid A splits down the middle. The believers. Pitchfork's Brent DiCrescenzo, a 25-year-old staff writer, gives it a perfect 10.0. His review is legendary, overwrought, passionate, strange. The experience and emotions tied to listening to Kid A are like witnessing the stillborn birth of a child, while simultaneously having the opportunity to see her play in the afterlife on IMAX. DiCrescenzo had spent hours downloading each track on Napster. At 2,000 internet speeds, it took an hour to get a single song. It put so much importance on each individual track, he tells Billboard years later. Like, I just waited an hour for this one song and it's just an ambient song? His review becomes a touchstone. For young fans alienated by mainstream magazines like Rolling Stone and Spin, Pitchfork's unrestrained enthusiasm feels authentic. Stephen Hayden, now a respected music critic, was 22 when Kid A dropped. He tells Billboard, "I think both Rolling Stone and Spin dinged Radiohead for taking themselves too seriously. But as a 22-year-old in 2000, I also took Radiohead extremely seriously. Kid A to me was a major event, and Pitchfork treated it that way too." Other positive reviews pour in. Billboard calls it an ocean of unparalleled musical depth, and the first truly groundbreaking album of the 21st century. The Village Voice, oblique, 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 also incredibly beautiful. Spin. Not the act of career suicide or feat of self-indulgence it will be castigated as. Rolling Stone's David Fricke gives it 4 stars. A work of deliberately inky, often irritating obsession. But this is pop, a music of ornery, glistening guile and honest ache, and it will feel good under your skin once you let it get there. The Skeptics. But plenty of critics hate it. Melody Maker's Mark Beaumont. Tubby, ostentatious, self-congratulatory, look I can suck my own cock whiny old rubbish. The Guardian's Alexis Petridis. Self-consciously awkward and bloody-minded, the noise made by a band trying so hard to make a difficult album that they felt it beneath them to write any songs. Q Magazine. What do you want for sounding like Aphex Twin circa 1993? A medal? Mojo. Kid A is intriguing, eccentric, obviously a grower, but by Radiohead standards, it can't help but disappoint. The most infamous pan comes from novelist Nick Hornby in The New Yorker. He calls it morbid proof that this sort of self-indulgence results in a weird kind of anonymity rather than something distinctive and original. Hornby's review becomes legendary for the wrong reasons, a symbol of critics missing the point, unable to hear what Radiohead was doing. Even another Rolling Stone piece mocks the album. Because it was decided that Radiohead were important and significant last time around, no one can accept the album as the crackpot art project it so obviously is. The divide isn't just among critics. Fans split too. Some embrace the radical reinvention. Others feel betrayed. Where are the guitars? Where are the songs? Why won't they just make OK Computer 2? On message boards and early music forums, debates rage. You either get it or you don't. Liking Kid A becomes a marker of sophistication, of being in the know. Ian Cohen, who later becomes a Pitchfork contributor, remembers being a teenage Radiohead guy when the album dropped. I'd leave parties or not even go so I could go back to my apartment and listen to Kid A completely alone. The album demands attention, demands repeated listens, demands submission to its strange logic. Radiohead themselves are philosophical about the division. Ed O'Brien tells Billboard, "The album's quite schizophrenic in parts." Yorke, speaking to The Guardian, is more introspective. "Once we finished the record, I started being easier on myself, because I understood a little bit better where I was supposed to be. February 24, 2001, the 43rd Annual Grammy Awards. Kid A wins Best Alternative Music Album, Radiohead's second Grammy in this category after OK Computer. It's also nominated for Album of the Year, losing to Steely Dan's Two Against Nature. The Grammy is nice, but the real vindication takes years. By the mid-2000s, critical opinion shifts. Publications that had been skeptical start re-evaluating Kid A. In 2006, Time magazine includes it in their 100 Best Albums, calling it the opposite of easy listening and the weirdest album to ever sell 1 million copies, but also a testament to just how complicated pop music can be. In 2009, nearly a decade after release, something remarkable happens. Rolling Stone publishes their Best Albums of the 2000s list. Number 1, Kid A. Pitchfork publishes their Best Albums of the 2000s list. Number 1, Kid A. The Times publishes their Best Albums of the 2000s list. Number 1, Kid A. 3 major publications, all crowning the same album the decade's best. Rob Sheffield, who reviews the album for Rolling Stone in 2000, later admits, "I completely underrated it at the time. I thought it was interesting but cold. I was wrong." The album that critics called derivative, pretentious, and self-indulgent is now recognized as prophetic. Music critic Simon Reynolds explains the shift to The Guardian. Kid A was addressing anxieties that wouldn't become mainstream for another 5 or 10 years. Surveillance, environmental catastrophe, digital disconnection. In 2000, it seemed paranoid. By 2010, it seemed prescient. The influence spreads beyond critical consensus. Artists across genres cite Kid A as transformative. Kanye West tells Complex magazine, "Kid A is the album that made me want to rap different. When I heard Idiotech, I was like, you can do this in music? You can make something this forward and still have it be emotional?" Bon Iver's Justin Vernon. "That record showed you could deconstruct everything and still make something beautiful." James Blake, whose electronic meets soul music draws heavily from Radiohead's reinvention, Kid A proved you could use technology not to hide emotion but to amplify it. Even dance music producers like Fortet and Caribou credit Kid A with showing them that electronic music could have the emotional depth of singer-songwriter confessionals. By 2020, the album's 20th anniversary, the conversation isn't whether Kid A is great, it's how great. Pitchfork runs a retrospective titled Kid A, the definitive story of how Radiohead made the album that changed everything. Brent DiCrescenzo, now looking back at his 10.0 review 2 decades later, tells them, "I stand by every word, including the weird stuff about stillborn children." Rolling Stone places it at number 20 on their updated 500 greatest albums of all time list, higher than OK Computer at number 42. What made Kid A so influential wasn't just the sound, it was the philosophy. Radiohead proved that a band could reject the music industry's playbook entirely and still succeed. You didn't need singles, you didn't need radio play. You didn't need to make yourself available for endless press junkets. You could make difficult, uncompromising art and trust your audience to do the work. The marketing strategy, blips, streaming, embracing Napster rather than fighting it, became the blueprint for 21st century album rollouts. When 9 Inch Nails released The Slip as a free download in 2008, they were following Radiohead's example. When Beyoncé surprise dropped her self-titled album in 2013 with no warning and only music videos as promotion, she was channeling Kid A's rejection of traditional cycles. When Frank Ocean livestreamed himself building a staircase for days before releasing Blonde in 2016, he was creating his own version of cryptic blips. The album also changed how bands thought about reinvention. After Kid A, it became acceptable, even expected, for successful rock bands to dramatically shift direction. Radiohead had given permission for artists to risk alienating their audience in pursuit of artistic growth. Arcade Fire's Reflector, 2013, went full dance rock after winning Album of the Year for their indie rock opus The Suburbs. Bon Iver's 22 A Million, 2016, replaced acoustic guitars with auto-tune and glitchy electronics. The National's Sleep Well Beast, 2017, incorporated modular synthesizers and drum machines into their trademark guitar-driven sound. All of them pointed back to Kid A as permission. But perhaps the album's greatest legacy is what it did for Radiohead themselves. By refusing to make OK Computer 2, they freed themselves from the trap of being one thing. Every album afterward could be anything. The jazz-influenced Amnesiac, the minimalist guitar work of Hail to the Thief, the gloomy electronics of The King of Limbs, the string-heavy A Moon-Shaped Pool. Ed O'Brien reflected on this in interviews. Kid A saved us. If we tried to make another OK Computer, we would have broken up. Tom would have had a complete breakdown. Instead, we learned we could be a different band every album and still be Radiohead. Thom Yorke, speaking to Rolling Stone in 2021, offered his most candid assessment. I wasn't trying to be difficult or avant-garde. I was trying to survive. Kid A was the sound of me trying to disappear and discovering I couldn't. And that ended up being beautiful. One aspect of the Kid A story often gets lost in the triumphalist narrative. The album nearly destroyed the band. The 18-month recording process strained every relationship. Ed O'Brien's diary entries from the sessions reveal tension. Everyone's on edge. Another meeting. I'm tired of meetings. We're not communicating, Phil Selway told Record Collector magazine. There were times when I thought, this is it, we're done. The songs didn't need me. I'd sit there for hours with nothing to do. That's hard on your ego. Colin Greenwood described the dynamic to The Guardian. It felt like we were in therapy together, but we weren't sure if the therapy was working or making things worse. Even after the album's success, the wounds lingered. When they reconvened to record Amnesiac, from the same sessions, and later Hail to the Thief, the democratic process remained fraught. Every decision required consensus. Every song sparked debate. Johnny Greenwood admitted in 2003, "The way we work is so slow and so painful. Everything gets questioned. Nothing is easy." Yorke's relationship with the band became more complicated. He pursued solo projects. The Eraser, 2006, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, 2014, Anima, 2019, where he could work quickly without committee. He told the New York Times, "I love Radiohead, but sometimes I need to make music where I don't have to explain every decision to 4 other people." The other band members pursued side projects too. Johnny Greenwood composed film scores for Paul Thomas Anderson. Ed O'Brien released a solo album. Phil Selway made 2 singer-songwriter records. In 2008, after releasing In Rainbows, Radiohead stopped being a full-time band. They became a project that convened every few years when everyone was available and interested. The gaps between albums grew longer. 7 years between The King of Limbs, 2011, and A Moon-Shaped Pool, 2016. Ed O'Brien told The Independent in 2020, "We nearly killed each other making Kid A, and we've spent the last 20 years figuring out how to be in a band without killing each other." The perfectionism that made Kid A great also made it unsustainable as a working method. November 5, 2021, Radiohead releases Kid Amnesia, a triple album reissue combining Kid A and Amnesiac with a third disc of unreleased material called Kid Amnesiae. The reissue includes alternate versions, B-sides, and studio experiments from the same sessions. Fans finally hear some of the 40-plus other songs and ideas that didn't make the original albums. Among the treasures, If You Say the Word, a complete song inexplicably shelved for 21 years. Follow Me Around, a fan-favorite live staple from the 90s, finally gets a studio version. The package also includes a new art book by Stanley Donwood and a 12-inch art print. There's even a PS5 PC Mac game called Kid Amnesia Exhibition, a virtual museum where players explore surreal environments based on the album's artwork. Critics who once dismissed Kid A now shower the reissue with praise. Uncut Magazine gives it 9/10, calling it a reminder of Radiohead at their most fearless. Pitchfork scores it 8.5/10, noting, 2 decades later, Kid A still sounds like the future. The Guardian's Alexis Petridis, who had panned the original, now gives the reissue 5 stars and admits, "I was wrong in 2000. This album is a masterpiece." For longtime fans, the reissue serves as vindication. The album they defended for years against accusations of pretension is now universally acknowledged as classic. But the most fascinating aspect of Kid Amnesia is what the outtakes reveal about the recording process. Many of the unreleased tracks are more conventional, guitar-driven, melodic, accessible. Songs like Follow Me Around and How to Disappear into Strings could have easily been radio singles. Radiohead deliberately chose not to release them. They chose difficulty over accessibility, experimentation over commercialism, art over product. Listening to the outtakes makes Kid A's original tracklist seem even more radical. These weren't desperate artists who couldn't write songs. They were artists with plenty of songs who chose to release the weirdest ones. Thom Yorke explained this in the reissue's press cycle. "We had safer options. We chose chaos, because chaos felt honest." In 2024, Kid A exists in a different context than it did in 2000. The anxieties Yorke sang about, surveillance, climate catastrophe, digital disconnection, information overload, are no longer abstract fears. They're daily realities. Lines like Ice Age coming, let me hear both sides, from Idioteki, sound less paranoid and more like headlines. The album's themes of disappearing, of trying to escape modern life, of feeling overwhelmed by technology, these resonate more now than they did at release. Music critic Mark Richardson writes for Pitchfork's 2020 retrospective, Kid A was alienating in 2000 because most people hadn't experienced digital alienation yet. Now everyone has. The album isn't strange anymore, it's documentary. The album also exists in a streaming era where its rejection of singles seems quaint. In 2000, refusing to release singles was radical. In 2024, most artists release albums without traditional singles, opting for streaming tracks instead. Kid A predicted a world where albums would be consumed whole, where listeners would discover songs through playlists and algorithms rather than radio programmers. Ironically, the album that was ahead of its time in 2000 now feels timeless, neither dated nor contemporary. It exists outside trends. New artists continue discovering it and citing its influence. Billie Eilish told Rolling Stone, "Kid A showed me you don't have to be loud to be intense. How to Disappear Completely is one of the most devastating songs ever written." Phoebe Bridgers, "That album taught me that sad music doesn't have to be pretty." Tyler, the Creator, "Radiohead showed me you can reinvent yourself and people might hate it at first, but if it's real, they'll come around." The album has sold over 3 million copies in the United States and continues to sell steadily each year. It's never stopped being relevant. The story of Kid A is a story about the cost of art. Thom Yorke had a mental breakdown. The band nearly imploded. They spent 18 months in studios across 3 countries making music nobody was sure would work. They risked their careers by refusing to promote it conventionally, and they created something that changed music forever. Kid A proved that commercial success and artistic integrity aren't mutually exclusive. That you can trust your audience to do the work. That reinvention is not only possible but necessary for survival. But it also revealed the darker truth. Creating art at this level requires sacrifice. Mental health, relationships, comfort, security. Ed O'Brien, reflecting on the experience 2 decades later, put it simply, "We went through hell to make that album. And I'd do it again. Because some things are worth going through hell for." Thom Yorke, asked if he's proud of Kid A, gives a characteristically cryptic answer, "Proud isn't the word. I'm grateful we survived it." The album closes with Motion Picture Soundtrack. Yorke's voice over harmonium and angelic choir, singing about seeing someone in the next life. It sounds like a suicide note, like a goodbye, like an ending. But it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. By trying to disappear, Radiohead discovered how to endure. By rejecting rock orthodoxy, they became one of rock's most important bands. By making an album nobody asked for, they made an album everyone needed. 24 years later, Kid A remains what it was in 2000. A transmission from somewhere else. A document of beautiful chaos. A photograph of artists at their breaking point, capturing light just before everything goes dark. And somehow, impossibly, it's still ahead of us. The album Radiohead made to disappear became the album that made them immortal. This has been the Sound Vault. Every album has a story. And some stories, like Kid A, never really end. They just keep revealing new meanings, new truths, new reasons to listen again. The short film with no images, the rock album with no guitars, the commercial suicide that became a blueprint, the sound of disappearing that echoed forever.